Summer's around the corner, which means it's time to plan your next getaway. Maybe to a historical site of the American Revolution, like me. I love using points for travel, and I'm always looking for ways to earn more. If you're a renter, one way to earn points is through Built. There's no cost to join. And just by paying rent, you unlock flexible points that can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, or your next Lyft ride, and more. When you pay rent through Built, you unlock two powerful benefits. First, you earn one of the industry's most valuable points on rent every month. No matter where you live or who your landlord is, your rent now works for you. Second, you gain access to exclusive neighborhood benefits in your city. Built's neighborhood benefits are things like extra points on dining out, complimentary post-workout shakes, free mats or towels at your favorite fitness studios, and unique experiences that only Built members can access. And when you're ready to travel, Built points can be converted to your favorite miles and hotel points around the world, meaning your rent can literally take you places. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, what are you waiting for? Start paying rent through Built and take advantage of your neighborhood benefits by going to joinbuilt.com/history. That's joinbilt.com/history. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/history to sign up for Built today. If you're a regular listener of HTDS, you know there's a lot of famous facial hair from history. From mustachioed Teddy Roosevelt to Union General Ambrose Burnside, who, I kid you not, is the actual namesake of the past-the-ears facial hair known as sideburns. But whether you rock some whiskers or not, getting your hands on quality razors and shaving products doesn't require you having to overpay. Harry's offers great products at a fraction of the price of the other big brands. And right now, you can get a $13 trial set for just $3 at harrys.com/htdspod. My personal look is clean-shaven presidential, so I couldn't resist trying Harry's Truman razor set based on the name alone. But aside from the name, the razor handle provides ergonomic comfort and control, while the 5-blade cartridge distributes pressure to help protect against nicks. I also used Harry's foaming shave gel, which has a rich lather with soothing aloe. Define your look with the best shaving products at the best price from Harry's. Normally their trial set is $13, but right now you can get it for just $3 at harrys.com/htdspod. That's our exclusive link, harrys.com/htdspod for a $3 trial set. Welcome to History That Doesn't Suck. I'm your professor, Greg Jackson, and as in the classroom, my goal here is to make rigorously researched history come to life as your storyteller. Each episode is the result of laborious research with no agenda other than making the past come to life as you learn. If you'd like to help support this work, receive ad-free episodes, bonus content, and other exclusive perks, I invite you to join the HTDS membership program. Sign up for a 7-day free trial today at htdspodcast.com/membership or click the link in the episode notes.
You know, what we talk about as a political scientist, we say a rebellion is when you do not like the conditions under which you are being governed and you want to change in your conditions. A revolution is I want to change in government. I would say that this thing started off as a desire to have a change in our conditions. We want the rights of Englishmen. And then it became a revolution.
On the 4th of July, 2026, the United States will celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That's right. America is having a big birthday next year. It's semi-quincentennial, or more commonly referred to as America 250. The road to the Declaration of Independence from Britain was years in the making, which I chronicled in the first 5 episodes of HTDS. In episode number 6, we came to April 1775 and the story of colonial militiamen squaring off against British regulars in the Massachusetts towns of Lexington and Concord. This marked the beginning of the War of American Independence, with the battle at Concord becoming the first time American leaders ordered their men to fire on the King's men. In doing so, they fired the shot heard round the world, as it will come to be known. Now, my friends, as we publish this special episode in April 2025, we have, in fact, reached the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution. From now until July 2026, we will occasionally bring you some special stories counting up to that first birthday card with 56 signatures, including the big autograph by the president of the Second Continental Congress, John Hancock. And to help get this party started, I'm happy to have Major General William Bill Rapp as my guest today. General Rapp retired from the U.S. Army after 33 years of distinguished service that included combat deployments in 3 wars. His full bio is in our episode description, yet I must highlight that he was not only a respected Army officer, but he also holds a PhD in political science from Stanford University and is a historian in his own right, as an author of an excellent book on the battles of Lexington and Concord. I think of him as a historian specializing in leadership. That's key because, as you'll hear General Rapp and I discuss, there wasn't an overwhelming amount of patriotism within the colonies in the sense of being a united group of united colonies or United States. No. They were very much separate colonies of the British Empire. Put it this way, strolling into a Boston pub prior to 1775 and saying New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, we're all the same patriots, right? Well, that would be about the equivalent of walking into Fenway Park, the home of the Boston Red Sox, and yelling, we're all baseball fans, so go Yankees. But they did have a shared sense of subjugation from a series of policies imposed on them by the British Crown and Parliament. You've heard of taxation without representation. Well, that was a part of it. Like I said, if you go back and listen to HTDS episodes 1 through 5, you'll get the full picture. But for now, suffice it to say that the fiery leadership of New Englanders, like the Adams cousins, John and Sam, and several others, was crucial in ultimately persuading their fellow American colonists that this regional rebellion against the Crown must become a united fight. They and other Massachusetts patriots proved masterful leaders that helped pave the path to an unlikely union of Britain's disparate North American colonies. And much of that grew out of the fighting that took place in April of 1775. We will not only discuss the battles of Lexington and Concord, but also George Washington's appointment as commander of the Continental Army in May of 1775, and the June 1775 Battle of Bunker Hill, which was actually fought at Breed's Hill in the heights of Charlestown, looking across the river from Boston. And finally, the battle that wasn't at Dorchester Heights, a strategic success that forced the Redcoats out of Boston for good. What I love about this 250-year look back with General Rapp is the contemporary insight that he brings to the conversation. For example, you'll hear him talk about the overconfidence of the British early on in their ability to outmaneuver these untested and loosely organized farmers, which they certainly were. But to General Rapp's mind, as a former wartime leader, he sees these early British victories as confirmation bias to their previously held assumptions about these rebels. That'll lead them to underestimate the colonial forces, a lesson of leadership failure from history, and a contributing factor to why Uncle Sam is about to have a 250th birthday next year. So get out your tricorn party hat. We're about to go, as Emerson's Concord hymn recites, by the rude bridge that arched the flood. Their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmer stood and fired the shot heard round the world. Welcome, General Rapp.
Hey, it is a privilege to be here with you. I've got a lot of respect for what you do. Thank you for having me.
You're too kind, General. And again, you're sure you want me to call you Bill?
That would be fantastic if I can call you Greg.
Yeah, please. Yes, I insist upon it. So diving right in, your book, Accomplishing the Impossible, Leadership that Launched Revolutionary Change, is all about the leaders in the early years of the War of Independence, those who oversaw the Boston campaign. And in it, you write, to quote you, America in 1776 was not a new nation under arms, imbued with patriotic fervor and a sense of sacrifice for the common good, but the efforts of the few in the Boston campaign provided the spark needed to unite at least some of the colonies in the Americas. Close quote. We are, of course, in absolute agreement on this. This shouldn't be controversial to anyone, right? The 13 colonies were truly distinct, different, disparate. It starts as a civil war in New England, effectively, the Revolution. And that's kind of where we're picking up our story here today.
The challenge is, a French observer said there is more patriotic fervor in a Parisian cafe than there is in all of Philadelphia.
That is amazing. I have not come across that quote before. Well, I mean, New England is it's in a very different, special space. You know, we've gone through 12 years of crises since the end of the French and Indian / 7 Years War, those 3 separate tax crises, to just repeat the word, but it's the appropriate one. And of course, it's 1773. We get to the last of those. That leads to the Boston Tea Party, where we really do have some fervor, but it's this small niche group, really, the Sons of Liberty. Sam Adams is, well, he is involved, but kind of in the shadows there. And that's what's taken us towards civil war, is the reaction to that Tea Party, the intolerable acts, to put the American name to them, right?
I'm a big fan of Sam Adams. I think, he is a political organizer that's beyond compare. And I love how Joseph Galloway described him at the Second Continental Congress. He eats little, sleeps little, drinks little, talks much, and is indefatigable in the pursuit of his objects. This idea of this patriotic fervor only existed in very much a minority. Maybe, Patrick Henry down in Virginia, certainly several of the Sons of Liberty and Sam Adams, but there's an awful lot of myth about we were all ready to just become Americans and not British. And Paul Revere said the British are coming, which he didn't say.
Of course, right?
The regulars are out because they all thought they were British. They just didn't like how they were being governed.
Yeah, I mean, the analogy to that would be if we had a similar situation today, it'd be like going around saying the Americans are coming in New York, right? Or shall we say Boston? Yeah, Sam is seeing the Redcoats pour into Boston for the Boston occupation. That, of course, culminated in the Boston Massacre. That was it for him. That was the moment. But when we fast forward then to the Second Continental Congress, I mean, even when we get to the Declaration of Independence, which of course puts us ahead of Lexington and Concord, so I'll be a little careful not to go too far there, but I mean, it's a very earnest debate. You've got John Adams pushing hard for independence. You've got John Dickinson with plenty of supporters in his corner going, whoa, that is crazy. That's too much. So all that to say, at this point, in April 1775, if Sam Adams has really gone to the independent side of things, I mean, he's way out on a limb in his own world. George Washington, who's yet to even take command of the still not a Continental Army, he believes that if there's a war, it's going to be a civil war. He's not thinking independence. So all that to say, it's April. And of course, the Redcoats are sent on a mission to hunt down this guy, Sam Adams, and John Hancock.
The 1st of September, 1774, the powder alarm.
Oh, yeah.
Because you got to remember that the assumptions that the British had about the militia and about the ability of the colonials, the country folk, to be able to organize and muster and have any kind of wherewithal, the British put on an absolutely textbook raid. George Madison of the 4th King's Own Regiment with 260 regulars steal all of the gunpowder out of the powder magazine, which is now very close to Tufts University in Somerville. But that had all of the powder, 250 kegs. And
that's a lot.
They get it, and they're back in Boston before any of the militias muster. To make matters worse, Madison sends 14 guys down to near Harvard into Cambridge to steal the 2 brass cannon that are out in front of the militia headquarters, and they get those back to Boston before anyone even is aware that they're doing it. What that did was it cemented in the minds of the British in London the biases that they came into this fight with, that the militia are worthless. In fact, the military aide to King George in January 1775 says, "Sire, give me 1,000 grenadiers and I shall march from Maine to Georgia and geld all the males." As if this was just going to be a cakewalk. John Pitcairn in March of 1775, he says to Earl of Sandwich, "I'm satisfied that one active campaign, a smart action, the burning of 2 or 3 of their towns, will set everything to right." And Lord Dartmouth tells Gage the colonials are just a rude rabble without a plan, without concert, and without conduct. And this raid against the Powder House on the 1st of September, 1774, cemented all of those biases in place. So we're looking at this Concord raid, which is 18 miles one way just to get to the center of Concord. Barrett's Farm is another 2 miles past that. So the light infantry companies are going to do 42 miles or so, if everything works perfectly, in 20 hours. And I wonder today, I'm an old soldier, how many of my soldiers could do 42 miles in 20 hours carrying, all of their equipment in their shoes didn't have a left or a right, and they were dumped off in water. So everything's wet to begin with. And so it was a remarkably over-optimistic plan to begin with.
Yeah, this sounds like you're talking about an Iron Man event, right? Like, forget fighting, forget engaging with a potential foe, which they clearly felt like they could do. They're just not worried about any sort of meaningful resistance.
And even if there was resistance, so Gage pulls the Light Infantry Company and the Grenadier Company out of every regiment to include the Royal Marines into this superstar team that was his very best soldiers. And the assumption there is you pull the superstars together, you're going to get superstar performance. And we have seen that to include a couple of our, Olympic men's basketball teams that may not have performed as well collectively as they should have given the talent that was in the room. There's so much arrogance and overconfidence when they go out on these things. And then he puts it under Francis Smith, who I'm sure not the right choice.
And whether we're talking about the Olympics or this military example, basically the Avengers only work in fiction. Only there can you bring together a bunch of superstars and it turns into this exponential thing, rather than possibly even dumbing down the ability of the superstars because they don't gel. I'm going the right way with your analysis.
I would say that you can put superstars together and you will get the synergy where the whole is more than the sum of the parts, but only if you give them time to build trust, to learn how to work together, to understand the different leaders.
Become
a team. Just throw them together at 10 o'clock at night and say, go do miraculous things.
Right.
It did not turn out well. But, surprisingly, there were a few voices in the wilderness among the British that did not think that this was a good idea. The Adjutant General of the British Army, a guy named Lieutenant General Sir Edward Harvey, said to attempt to conquer America internally with our land forces is as wild of an idea as ever controverted common sense. What are we doing? Gage says, if you're contemplating sending 10,000 as being sufficient, send me 20,000. If 1 million is thought enough, give me 2. It'll save both blood and treasure in the end. This idea of put together a small force, relatively small force, 840 is my estimate for it. And the thought that they could get out there 38 miles and back to Boston before there's mobilization, it was a pretty heroic assumption.
Heroic, that is a kind word to use. So this is an incredible march. It's ridiculous. And then when they get to Lexington, that had to only further their assumptions. Right? I mean, it's not like the Green was an amazing showing for the Lexington militia.
Well, remember, the Lexington militia is told by Parker to disperse. Yeah. They're only about 75. The numbers vary, 67 to 77, somewhere in there. Of the 150 actually came back at 5:15.
Right.
So Parker tells his men when he's being yelled at by Major Pitcairn on horseback, disperse, you rascals, you rebels. He says, disperse, men. So they have started to turn and a shot goes off. If it was a pistol shot, it was probably by the excitable Major Edward Mitchell, one of the British guys that was out trying to find the Paul Revere and William Dawes. If it was a rifle shot or a musket shot, it probably came from a colonial who was late to the party. But anyway, the 1st or the 4th and the 10th Light Infantry fire a volley into the mass of Parker's guys, and they kill 8.
Which isn't much of a mass. Let's note that as well, right? I've seen so many different estimates there as well, but I've seen it as low as even 40. I think that's too low, but on the higher side, maybe 80. And not all of the British have made it right to the Green. They're not facing the full force, but several hundred are there by this point.
A guy named Jesse Adair, he's a Marine, and Pitcairn puts him in the lead of these Army regular companies, the 10th and the 4th are the 2 in the front, because he's a really fast walker, and they're behind schedule, and they need to set a very fast pace. But Jesse Adair is like a ballroom brawler. He's itching for a fight. And when they get up there and they see Parker, even though he's well off the route, he's standing parallel to the route that they need to go to Concord, the 10th and the 4th turn off the route and confront. That's really only about 75 to 80 guys, those first 2 companies. They're followed up by the 5th, who's right behind them, and a couple more light infantry companies. That initial force going, it's almost a 1-for-1, but they have discipline, they fire, and then they go with bayonets. And really difficult for Pitcairn cannot get control. Smith comes up and orders a drummer to beat the recall, and that's how he gets his guys back onto a formation. But we look at Lexington as a fight, it really wasn't. It was, a bunch of regulars shooting into guys who, in my opinion, were not putting up a fight, in fact, had been ordered to disperse. And Lieutenant Edward Gould of the 4th Regiment says, on our approach in his deposition, they dispersed. And so I believe that there was no order to fire, which is why, although I anger the people in Lexington, I say the shot heard round the world happened on Concord Bridge. And so, all the Lexington school children have been told differently, but
Sure. But those are fighting words in Lexington. I have no
it
doubt.
really is. It really
Yeah.
is. Well, and then they go past that. They get marching. The real objective is Concord, and
Right.
they get there, and the militia are completely mobilized. I mean, in fact, they get a little bit of an escort coming into Concord, as you recall, and then the militia go to their muster field past North Bridge up on Pawtucket Hill, or Punta Cassett Hill. And those 6 light infantry companies go. 3 are left near the bridge. 3 more go on to Barrett's farm to look for the stuff that they know is there but has been buried. And those 3 at the bridge getting a little nervous because that mass of militia up on the hill under James Barrett is starting to get angry.
Now, Bill, let me get your take. I know that National Park Services likes to emphasize that they have no evidence of the guns being buried. I love the story and am inclined to go with it. In your research, did you ever find anything that threw this into myth legend for you versus...
It is, you just don't know how much was embellished. I believe that James Barrett, Colonel Barrett, had an awful lot of supplies at his farm that had either been dispersed or buried or hidden in his farm. And he was confident enough. He left the farm under control of his very capable wife. And
she was an impressive woman.
A formidable woman when it came to telling the British regulars this is private land and, get the heck away. They did some cursory looks. They couldn't find anything and then came back. It was what was really happening behind them with those 3 companies, the 43rd under Captain Laurie in charge, but the 4th and the 10th Light Infantry nearby. That is what that mass of militia led by the Acton Minuteman came down, and that is where that shot heard round the world happened. What I think is really remarkable is Barrett and all of the militia colonels had been given very strict guidance. The Continental Congress to the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts, Committee of Safety, all saying, do not fire first, act only on the defensive. And in fact, when all of this militia was getting all upset because there was fires going on in downtown Concord,
which is an accident. I always like to emphasize that. Totally unintentional. But now you've got these colonial militiamen up at the farm, and they just see smoke coming from downtown.
Yeah, and they're burning our town. We're just going to stand here while they're burning our town. And finally, Colonel Barrett turns to Major John Buttrick and says, you can guide them down and take them down. And this is where Isaac Davis and the Acton Minuteman Company declares the right to be in the lead. Davis was the blacksmith in Acton, and he said, I'll make bayonets for everybody if you elect me captain. And so they were fully armed with bayonets on their muskets. They took the lead, and unfortunately, Mrs. Davis slept the widow that night as he was killed in that first volley. When the 4th Light Infantry, I don't believe without a command from their officers, just this mass of militia getting closer and closer, let loose a volley. And that's when James Buttrick gave his famous words, fire, for God's sakes, men, fire. And that was the first time a militia officer had ordered colonial militia to fire on British regulars. That was the shot heard round the world.
Yeah.
When I look at what can we learn today, the unbelievable ability to communicate intent down to every single private. We cannot afford to start the war. Do not fire first. And James Barrett, when every company of militia passed him walking down to the bridge with Buttrick, would tell them, each of the companies, do not fire first, do not fire first, do not fire first. So when the British fired, there was an absolute stoppage, which is why Buttrick had to say, for God's sakes, men, fire, because they didn't want to, this was new terrain.
This had been so drilled into them. We do not fire. It was very intentionally keeping away from that itchy trigger finger.
And maybe that young private in the militia didn't understand the strategic big picture, but Sam Adams absolutely did. Joseph Warren absolutely did. That if the New England governments were seen to, and the New England militia starting the war, they did not have the backing of the rest of the colonial delegations. They had to be seen as acting on the defensive, which is why the strategic narrative, what happened between the 19th of April and the 17th of June where most people just blip over that bit of history, I think is the most strategic piece of history, at least in the first, 2.5 years of the war.
Shots are fired, and on the other side of this quick break, the general and I discuss the bloody battle that ensues during the British retreat from Concord back to Boston. And later, General Rapp will share his thoughts on leadership lessons from history. History That Doesn't Suck is supported by Kinsta, a powerful WordPress hosting platform for your website and online business. I'm a historian, but I'm also a small business owner. That means I have a lot of administrative tasks. That take me away from my work of analyzing the past. But I can't lose sight of the fact that my business is dependent on sharing that research online. Kinsta doesn't just host WordPress websites. They offer ironclad security, reliability, and blazing speed. By switching to Kinsta, your website could run up to 200% faster. Plus, their expert team is there to help you, 24/7, 365 days a year. You talk to real humans, not AI chatbots. TripAdvisor, NASA, and Indeed are among the 120,000 businesses that trust Kinsta with their WordPress websites. Tired of being your own website support team? Switch your hosting to Kinsta and get your first month free. And don't worry about the move. They'll handle the whole transition for you. No tech expertise required. Just visit kinsta.com/history to get started. That's KINSTA.com/history. My mom is an excellent pianist, but her mother, my grandma, never made her practice piano. Mom said, we were never told to work at the piano. Instead, she asked us to play at the piano, and we felt her delight when we brought old sheet music to life for her. I only know this part of Grandma and Mom's life thanks to Storyworth. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved one a memory-provoking question that you get to help pick. Questions like, did you ever get in trouble in school? Or, how did you decide how many children to have? All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story. Long or short, it doesn't matter. They can either write a story or record it over the phone for Storyworth to transcribe. You'll be emailed a copy of your loved one's response as they're submitted over the course of the year. You'll get to enjoy their retelling of the stories you already know and be surprised by stories you never heard before. After that year of fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. In fact, my mom made a copy for me and each of my kids. Give all the moms in your life a unique, heartfelt gift you'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/HTDS. That's storyworth.com/HTDS to save $10 on your first purchase.
This show is brought to you by Boca. Boca knows that when you take care of your mouth, your whole body benefits. That's why they create elevated oral care that fortifies your teeth. Boca's toothpaste uses a fluoride alternative called gung-ho, a form of calcium that makes up the majority of your tooth enamel and dentin, which helps to remineralize enamel, freshen breath, and whiten teeth. The best part? It's formulated for both kids and adults, making it easy to introduce health habits early. Boca is safe if accidentally swallowed, which is so helpful for kids who are still learning how to brush. Boca's gung-ho toothpaste comes in delicious flavors like Element and Lemon Lavender for adults, and Orange Cream and Strawberry Mango for kids. All flavors are free from SLS, endocrine disruptors, and parabens. Boca is the #1 children's toothpaste on Amazon with over 40,000 5-star reviews. For a limited time, Boca is offering parents like you and I 15% off on Amazon and at Boca.com with code HERHEALTH15. That's HERHEALTH15. Make the switch to Boca for the whole family today at BOKA.com.
It's really remarkable when we think about that seminal moment with the command by an American officer actually saying, yes, fire on the King's troops, that it didn't happen sooner. I mean, I think about so many different instances in the 12 years from 1763 to 1775 where things could have gone off the rails. I'm kind of astonished when I reflect on that history that it took until April 1775. And the Americans were able to navigate that in such a way that they were not to be seen as the instigators.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. The 27th of February is the raid on Salem. And that
I was thinking of that.
it very easily could have been that spark that sets this whole thing in motion. In fact, there's a great quote. It might be invented after the fact by a participant, but he says, yelling to the British commander, you have no authority to fire here, which was peacetime rules in Boston. You had to have a magistrate give permission and all of those kind of things. You had to declare that this was a mob and please disperse, all of those kind of things. He says, you have no right to fire. The local minister came up with this face-saving, lower the drawbridge. They'll walk across it. They'll go 100 yards, then do a U-turn and go back to their ships and leave, and nobody gets hurt. But that very easily, as you note, could have been, the start of this thing. It was that firing at Lexington that caused those at Concord to say, things have changed now. This is not the same. And this retreat becomes incredibly bloody. You've got this link up with Hugh Percy, and he's just a fabulous British character. He shows up with his brigade minus all of his elite troops. And that brigade performs so much better than the elite troops when they were all thrown together. He doesn't have any of his light infantry or grenadiers. They are completely smoked, we would say today. They're tired, they're out of ammunition, carrying their wounded.
I mean, imagine this. At this point, I don't know what the exact mileage would be from Concord to
Monotony.
See, I'm going to cheat. Arlington. But man, they've marched over a marathon by this point.
18, it's another 6 back to Lexington, another about 4 from Lexington to the start of the Monotony Plain. So you're right. They're at 26 miles, and the last 12, they've been getting shot at this whole time. They're out of water. They're wounded. They're kind of like you put those pedometers on a soccer player in a World Cup match, and it says he ran 13 miles or something like that. These guys, maybe the street distance was 10 miles, but I bet you they were doing many more than that just in the off and back. And it is a very difficult situation. But Hugh Percy, I love his quote. He writes a letter to the adjutant general the day after. He says, whosoever looks upon them as an irregular mob will find himself very much mistaken. They have men amongst them who know very well what they are about, having been employed as rangers against the Indians and Canadians, and this country being much covered with woods and hilly is very advantageous to their method of fighting. I mean, even Hugh Percy, who was not a big fan of the colonial militia, grudging respect. And a lot of the British regulars is they won't fight us straight up like a man to man, like you're supposed to. Like, why should they? They don't have bayonets, or most of them don't. And they're not disciplined to be able to reload in 20 seconds when people are coming at you with bayonets in the charge. They're like, why would you expect that they would fight you in the way that you want to be fought?
Yeah, it's simply the frustration of, not winning.
You're exactly right. Now I get a chance to talk about my town, Arlington, which back then was called Monotony. The heaviest fighting by far is in Monotony. This is when upwards of 14,000 maybe are starting to show up. Some low estimates at the 4,000 to 5,000, but 25 of the 49 colonial killed are killed in Monotony. 40 of the 73 British killed are killed in Monotony. At one place, the Jason Russell House, which can be toured today, it has bullet holes in the walls. That house is the scene of probably upwards of 20 or more combined colonial and British killed right in the yard, right around it, or inside the house. So this was vicious fighting that was happening during this retreat march.
And that's a higher body count than Lexington and Concord combined.
Easy.
Yeah.
It was fascinating how these militia were able to coordinate action. But as a soldier, I also think about the difficulty that Percy had in trying to get his beleaguered force back through this mass of angry militia to the safety of Boston. And I don't know if another leader in the British force would have been able to do it had Percy not been there. Cool, but at the same time, very energetic, constantly moving around, constantly rotating units out of the rear guard, because his rear guard, which started off as the 23rd, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, had to change it with the Royal Marines just due to losses. The Royal Marines take the largest sheer number of losses just in that rear guard action through the end of Monotony and into Cambridge. It is a very vicious fight. And then the night ends at 8 o'clock at night. And no one really knows. The world's turned upside down. And then it becomes, what do we do about this now? And Samuel Adams has been waiting for this moment. He wrote a letter on the 21st of March to Richard Henry Lee, and he said, "It is a good maxim in politics as well as in war to put and keep your enemy in the wrong." And then to Samuel Cooper in April, he writes, "We cannot make events. Our business is wisely to improve them." So this is all about, how do we tell this story? Because there's really two audiences, as you know. You've got London,
Yep.
and then you've got the rest of the colonies that 12 of them agreed to show up for the Second Continental Congress that'll start on the 10th of May.
Well, and let's remember that the population as well, right? It's not like we tend to fall into saying the colonials, but really there's this subgroup of patriots / rebels, depending on your perspective, and they are in the minority. They aren't even the majority, right? Your average colonial's probably just thinking, oh my goodness, why can't politics just be calmer?
You know, what we talk about as a political scientist, we say a rebellion is when you do not like the conditions under which you are being governed and you want to change in your conditions. A revolution is, I want to change in government. I would say that this thing started off as a desire to have a change in our conditions. We want the rights of Englishmen. And then it became a revolution. But at this time, it's still a rebellion. And you're right, there's a minority that really want an active rebellion. I would say the larger majority would like to still be British citizens, just with the full rights of being a British citizen.
Yep.
And they thought that they had earned that right with their performance in the French and Indian Wars. They thought they were full partners in empire with the British. And so this narrative, and the narrative is brilliantly constructed. 97 depositions, so legal depositions signed. You know, here's what happened. I wasn't doing anything. They shot first. You know, they're remarkably similar in their soundings, but 97. And then Benjamin Church writes the narrative. And as you know, Benjamin Church was the traitor. He was the one telling Gage what the Committee of Safety was doing. But I think in order to show that he was still very much a member of the Sons of Liberty, he wrote the narrative, the actual narrative of this battle. And it's brilliantly done. Those two combined are handed to Captain John Derby, who has been told 10 days earlier, put your fastest vessel into ballast only for a transatlantic crossing. Your only cargo is going to be a leather pouch. And that pouch had those narratives. 4 days after the fight, you know, Gage puts his battle report, which the first sentence is absolutely brilliant in a sad way. He says, "Nothing much to trouble your lordships with, but a small thing that happened here on 19th instant," you know, the way of saying 19th of this month.
The 19th of this month, yep.
And he puts it on his normal mail packet ship, the 200-ton HMS Suki, and sends it to London. But the Quero, the 62-ton fast schooner, beats the Suki to London by 12 days. Oh, the narrative goes straight to, they thought it was going to go to Ben Franklin, but Ben Franklin had switched with Arthur Lee. And so John Derby sneaks into London, finds Arthur Lee, hands him this narrative, and Lee sees the brilliance of what it is. And he takes it right to the Lord Mayor of London, John Wilkes. And Wilkes, no fan of the government, publishes the entire thing in the London Evening Post. And for 12 days, the only thing that the British people have to read is the colonial narrative. And they're going, wait. Gage will send us what his side of the story was. And his side of the story is nothing much to bother your lordship with. And, you know, from that time, England had great difficulty recruiting soldiers from their own lands because the people are like, what are we doing? We're clearly in the wrong on this, which is why we have Hessian mercenaries coming in. You know, they needed the troops. And that same narrative goes down the coastline. Georgia decides to come. And they have about a month of debate. And on the 14th of June, Congress says we are embracing this mass of New England militia in the siege around Boston, and we're going to call it the Continental Army. And a day later, brilliantly, John Adams and Sam Adams, much to the chagrin of Hancock, who really wanted to be, he was pissed.
So badly.
And they choose George Washington because what they realized is that you choose Hancock, it is still a New England army. You choose George Washington, it is a Continental Army. And I thought that was an absolutely brilliant move. So when I look at what is the big turning point in the early part of this, It was that strategic narrative. Joseph Warren, who cut his teeth with Sam Adams on the Boston Massacre. Back to our audience, the Boston Massacre, how many people died? 5.
Yeah, 5. Yeah.
Yeah. Not much of a massacre. And in fact, it was a mob that was pummeling, this one sentry. Then the 10 reinforcements came up. It was absolutely a contrived little riot.
Well, there's a reason that John Adams took the case, all right, was willing to defend the Redcoats, for crying out loud.
Right.
And that, by and large, most of them were acquitted. But yeah, that doesn't really fit with a massacre narrative, but that was the narrative that won. And to exactly your point, right? Again, this is winning the narrative.
Yeah. And, so the Boston Massacre, very much a Sam Adams and Joseph Warren piece of creative writing. And it is Joseph Warren who, he doesn't write the narrative, but he's overseeing this whole process because he knows, and Sam Adams has pushed on him, said, we got 2 audiences. We got to get it to London before the Gage's report, and we've got to get it down to the colonies before the Second Continental Congress meets. Absolutely pivotal.
So, Bill, I think the big takeaway is that Sam Adams was a better creative writer than Brewer.
He was not a very successful brewer, though we do appreciate his beer today.
That's right. One of my favorite historical documents, as weird as this might seem, is a soldier's journal entry from July 3rd, as George Washington's taking over, right, this ragtag group that we're now calling a Continental Army. And he had written on July 1st, nothing of interest today, or something to that effect. And July 2nd is ditto, July 3rd, ditto. That's it. He could not be bothered. I mean, we know from sources, George Washington showed up not like a huge thing. He's not the rock star that he will later be, as well known as he is across the colonies from his French and Indian War days, or at least, somewhat known. Yeah, there was fife, drum, and all those things in the common. And clearly to this soldier, to this militiaman, yep, I could not care less that this George Washington Virginian has shown up here in New England. It's just a real fun, lens to look in and remember how human these people are, the myths that aren't there yet, and the respect that had to be earned. That George Washington, beloved as he is by the Continental Army as this moves forward, he actually shows up with quite the difficulty to surmount the tensions between the separate colonies. That's a rough thing to overcome.
Exactly. And when Washington shows up, he's appalled by a number of things. He tells his confidant, Joseph Reed, could I have foreseen what I have and am about to experience, no consideration upon earth should have ever induced me to accept this command. What he sees as unbelievable insubordination, terrible field hygiene. Everyone's getting dysentery. And because you can't tell somebody where to go do their daily business, he starts instituting, I want to know who the captains are. You've got to put something on. I want to know who the sergeants are. When I come up, somebody's got to be in charge, and I need to talk to someone there. And lots of whippings going on now. And so I can only imagine these militia going, what the heck is this? In fact, one of them says, new lords, new laws. He starts instituting court-martials of all of the leaders who did not, what he felt, do their duty at Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill. And that, again, is a shock to this army. You're like, there's accountability being had? I love the Breed's Hill, Bunker Hill is what we know it today, but it was fought on Breed's Hill, as you're well aware.
Yep.
And I love the fact that Prescott goes up there and his orders are really clear. Go to Bunker Hill.
Well, and Bill, forgive me because I realize we blew past it, and I think that's my fault. But so April, Lexington, Concord, but not me. Look at that. I'm going to pretend I said that properly. I went ahead and slurred it a little
It was
bit.
awesome. It was awesome.
Thank you. And so it's June 17th. We have Breed's / Bunker Hill, or Bunker's Hill, if you want to go with John Quincy Adams' way of saying it. Then in July, Washington shows up. So all that to say, my apologies. Straighten out our timeline. Back to where you were.
Yeah, so Bunker Hill, they find out that the British are going to move up to the high ground at Dorchester Heights and Bunker Hill. And Bunker Hill still has a fortification on the top of it. When the British, right after the 20th of April, they created a small fortification at the very high ground where the church is now on the Charlestown Peninsula is Bunker Hill or Bunker's Hill.
Well, and if I may, I mean, the geography, right? People who, even if you know Boston, if you live there today, it's a different Boston. All the swampy land that's been filled in to expand. Charlestown is really a very pronounced peninsula. It just doesn't look anything like 21st century Boston.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So Bunker Hill on the Charlestown Peninsula, it's a 100-yard wide neck, not quite as narrow. The Roxbury Boston neck is only about 75 yards wide. So both of them are essentially islands with a little bitty isthmus that you can cross and get onto. After the fortifications are started to be built right after the siege started, it might as well have been an island because you had really heavy colonial fortifications just to the west, and you had the British neck fortifications, and that basically created a no man's land right there and cut off Boston. But the high ground is Bunker Hill. If you go 800 meters directly toward Boston, you go down a little valley and you come up a smaller hill, about 80 feet lower. It is Breed's Hill. And so Joseph Warren on the 16th of June tells Prescott and Israel Putnam at this committee of safety, as peace and reconciliation is what we seek for, should it not be better that we act only on the defensive and give no unnecessary provocation? To which Israel Putnam from Connecticut says, Dr. Warren, we shall have no peace worth anything until we gain it by the sword. But Prescott, who agrees with Putnam, Prescott is a Massachusetts regimental commander, very well respected, is given 1,100 troops and said, go up and fortify Bunker Hill and hold it until you're relieved. And they get up there at about 11 o'clock at night on the night of the 16th of June, and they have an argument, him and Israel Putnam and the engineer Richard Gridley, and they take about an hour. And then the soldiers see everybody start moving down to the lower hill. And that's where they built the fortification. 400 yards from the anchorage, a direct provocation to the British. And so they build that redoubt there where, for those around Boston, it's where the monument is right now. The Bunker Hill Monument sits on Breed's Hill right in the middle of that fortification. And that is way too close for the British to do. Major General John Burgoyne, when they have their meeting, the British, what are we going to do? He says, this is an opportunity to clearly show this rabble what the power of disciplined troops in the attack can do. We did not have a good day on the 19th of April. This is where we show them what the best infantry in the world can do.
Hubris strikes again.
Oh, my goodness. But, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when this fight starts, that 1,100 has dwindled to 350. With Putnam due to desertion. One of the eyewitnesses says, it was not surprising to see one wounded man carried away by 20 to the safety of Bunker Hill.
No.
So then he orders Moulton of the Connecticut line to go extend the line out a little bit because they've got this wide open left flank. And that's when Stark comes up. Stark leading the 1st and the 3rd New Hampshire. And Stark, who's this old fighter with Rogers Rangers. He is a very astute combat leader. Without any coordination from Prescott, he sees immediately that Prescott's left is completely in the wind, and he moves his guys down, gets behind this rail fence, and puts 3 companies right down on the beach. And that's where he posts himself, and he walks out 50 yards, and he puts a pile of rocks, and he comes back and he says, I will run through with my sword anyone who fires before the regulars get to my pile of rocks at 50 yards. And that's where the initial attack happened. All of those light infantry coming right up the beach, and it is an absolute slaughter. The first 2 waves absolutely pummeled against Stark and against Knowlton and then against Prescott. And Prescott, by this time, with no reinforcement, nobody bringing powder. And there's thousands of guys on Bunker Hill with Israel Putnam, thousands of them. No one going forward to reinforce Prescott, with the exception of Stark, the 1st and the 3rd under Colonel Reed of New Hampshire. They come forward, but they're on the left. And that 3rd attack, by now the Colonials in the redoubt have run out of ammunition and they don't have bayonets. That's where Joseph Warren is killed. 115 or so Americans killed, most of them in that redoubt when it is swarmed over by the British. John Pitcairn is killed yards from the redoubt as he's attacking with the Royal Marines.
You've mentioned a number of big names, at least big for those who know Revolutionary history, right? Are there any specifics about their leadership that you think stand out any differently from what was seen at Lexington and Concord?
Think about the orders that Stark was given. His order said reinforce Prescott on Bunker Hill. 2 parts to that order, reinforce Prescott and a location on Bunker Hill. And he gets up to Bunker Hill and Prescott's not on Bunker Hill. Prescott's 800 yards forward But what he says is, I understand the intent of the orders that I have been given. I am not going to follow my orders to the letter, which means stop here at Bunker Hill. It is reinforce Prescott, and he moves forward. All those other upwards of 3,000 colonial troops stopped at Bunker Hill and did not go forward. John Stark writes after the battle, had Putnam, Israel Putnam is on Bunker Hill with all of those 3,000 troops. Had Putnam done his duty, he would have decided the fate of this country in its very first action. And William Prescott has an argument with Putnam right afterwards. He says, why did you not bring up men in my support? And Putnam says, I could not drive the dogs forward. And Prescott calmly says, if you could not drive them up, perhaps you might have led them up.
Oh,
this idea of where's your leadership by example? So when I look at Stark, I see what I would call disciplined disobedience. He understood the intent of the orders that he was given and fulfilled them, and I think was absolutely instrumental. I look at Prescott, who disobeyed his orders and brought on a general action that he had no real authority to do so, but his conduct in the fight was remarkable. I look at Israel Putnam as not having done his duty. And although Putnam, as you know, had a mythical reputation for bravery, and there's all of these stories about Israel Putnam, but when it mattered on Bunker Hill and Breeds Hill, he was not the leader that the men needed. He wouldn't lead by example and lead them forward. And Thomas Gage now has kind of seen the light. He said, these people show a spirit and a conduct against us that they never showed against the French. And everybody has judged them by their former appearance and conduct, which has led to a great many mistakes. I think they understand now what they're up against.
Okay, another quick break, and then we're going to jump ahead to March 1776, when Boston was finally liberated from the British. Get ready to charge up Dorchester Heights with General George Washington, as analyzed by my guest, General William Rapp.
Weight loss. It needs to be fast and sustainable. Noom GLP-1 starts at just $149 and ships to your door in 7 days. Take it from Clay-Vossier, who lost 35 pounds on Noom.
It's a psychological thing, too. They're definitely teaching how to live a better, healthier lifestyle. Noom is teaching me the habits so I do not have to be on weight loss meds forever.
Don't believe it? Take it from Lauren, who lost 22 pounds on Noom.
If I come off of the GLP-1, it's not going to automatically make my weight yo-yo back. I'm going to have good skills and know what to do to take care of myself.
$149 GLP-1s? Now that's Noom Smart. Noom, the smart way to lose weight. Get started with Noom GLP-1 at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. Individual results may vary. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
Each spring, 23 Pulitzer Prizes are awarded for distinguished journalism, books, drama, and music.
It was disbelief and pride and life-changing.
My name is Nicole Carroll, and I'm a member of the Pulitzer Board and host of Pulitzer on the Road, the official podcast of the Pulitzer Prizes. In each episode, winners reveal how much labor and risk, heart and imagination go into creating their prize-winning work. We'll talk with novelists and reporters.
We found stuff that no one had heard before or found out. It was exciting.
Critics and playwrights.
I do not want to live in a world where we don't go on a stage and tell the truth about who we are.
And columnists who've risked their lives to speak truth to power.
What moral right would I have to call on my fellow Russian citizens to stand up to the Putin dictatorship if I didn't do it myself?
The second season of Pulitzer on the Road premiered March 10th. Follow and listen on Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
Now at Verizon, we have some big news for your peace of mind. For all our customers, existing and new, we're locking in low prices for 3 years guaranteed on My Plan and My Home. That's future you peace of mind. And everyone can save on a brand new phone on My Plan when you trade in any phone from one of our top brands. That's new phone peace of mind. Because at Verizon, whether you're already a customer or you're just joining us, we got you. Visit Verizon today. Price guarantee applies to then current base monthly rate. Additional terms and conditions apply for all offers.
So Washington has to create an army. He actually has to create two armies. The army that he takes over in July disbands in November and December. They believe they only signed up for a contract through the end of the calendar year. In January of 1776, George Washington writes to John Hancock, "It is not in the pages of history, perhaps to furnish a case like ours, to maintain a post within musket shot of the enemy for 6 months without gunpowder, and at the same time to disband one army and recruit another. Within that distance of 20-odd British regiments is probably more than ever was attempted." This idea of George Washington and how he was able to keep everything together. And he's itching for a fight. And you know where he gets this? He gets the inspiration for how he's going to solve this dilemma of how do you get the British out of Boston from two very unlikely sources. Two of my favorite young people, Henry Knox, who's 25 years old. He's a bookseller. He's very gregarious, doesn't look very soldierly. He's overweight, but he's got a very inventive mind. And in November of 1775, Knox comes to Washington and says, "General Washington, if you would allow me to, I can go to Fort Ticonderoga and retrieve the cannon that are there." Remember, Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen took Fort Ticonderoga in May, but then left. And it's absolutely abandoned, but all the cannon are there.
Right.
And this is a winter march. And he comes back with 59 cannon weighing over 62 tons. They were counting on a lot of snow, and they would just drag them on sleds over the snow and the frozen rivers. But then there's a snap thaw in January, and it makes things really, really difficult. But he gets back by the end of January with all of these cannon. And then he has to start training people how to use them. And George Washington, it's a cold winter in Massachusetts, and the ground is frozen. And George Washington wants to take Dorchester Heights, and he wants to fortify it, but you can't dig too much in the ground. And he's scrambling to find an idea. And this young engineer officer, Rufus Putnam, comes up with this idea. He knows it's in a book, Field Fortifications book by the British. And it's a thing called chandeliers and gabions. Think of those, what you would put firewood in. You know, it's the frame that could hold firewood. You turn it sideways and you put fascines of sticks all bundled together, and you can create kind of an instant wall. And a gabion is a woven barrel that you fill with dirt, and you put a bunch of those next to each other. You know, that the gabion is how we built almost all of our forts in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 20 years.
Really?
The same technique that Rufus Putnam used on Dorchester Heights is how we built above ground level. And,
Bill, you might know this, but that was also used at Yorktown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Rufus Putnam takes his idea to John Thomas, the general ahead of him, and Thomas loves the idea, takes him right to George Washington. George Washington says, "Young man, get after it." And they just mobilize. And on that one night, the night of the 4th and 5th of March, they send 800 men under Thomas, to include 5 companies of riflemen new to the war. There were no rifles at Lexington and Concord, no rifles at Bunker Hill. That's security. And then a whole bunch of Teamsters, over 350 wagons with all the Teamsters hauling all of this prefabricated material up, 1,200 soldiers that are the laborers. They're building these forts. And at sunrise, 3,000 more join them to man the forts, finish them, and be prepared. And when they wake up in the morning and they look up there, Sir William Howe, who's now in charge, Gage has gone home, says, "My God, these fellows have done more in one night than I could make my entire army do in 3 months." And his engineer, John Montresor, says, "The colonials raised the forts with an expedition equal to that of the genie belonging to Aladdin's wonderful lamp." In one night, they built multiple big forts on the top, and they were all armed by the time the sun came up on the 5th of March. Contrast the level of organization that this army was able to do on the 5th of March to what they did on the 17th of June on Bunker Hill. Very haphazard. There's no organization to it. It was a disaster, but it was brilliantly executed. America doesn't know about Dorchester Heights because the British, for many reasons, never attacked it, much to Washington's chagrin.
Right.
And they send out a flag of truce and says, "If you let us leave without molesting us, we will be gone. If you molest us, we will burn Boston to the ground." And they make the decision, and evacuation day happens, and we still celebrate it today. This month in March, the British sail off, never to come back to Boston for the remainder of the war. But most Americans don't know about Dorchester Heights because the battle never happened.
Right, because it was so successful. It was so effective at preserving life.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It was unbelievable.
Well, and I'll just go ahead and say, just to make sure listeners catch this, because it is so important, is that when you think about those three peninsulas again, right, the Charlestown to the north, Boston in the center, and Dorchester on the south, that
you sound like a Southie. You're good.
Oh, that's what I'm going for. Thank you. So, the way that the elevation worked is that Washington was effectively impenetrable. The British cannon could not reach them, yet they could have unleashed on the British down in the harbor below.
And with their longer range guns, like the 18-pounders and the 24-pounders, could hit the anchorage. All of those, it basically made untenable the entire anchorage for the Royal Navy that was supporting them.
It had to be utterly embarrassing. And I think, as you talk about leadership, I'm not saying anything new to you, but for Washington to listen, and this is George Washington to a T, right? He does it throughout the entire war. He gets his military family, his council of war that by and large really excels at having a good sense of when it's time to defer to them, which is more often than not.
Yeah. And, I love George Washington here. I fall into the camp of he was the indispensable man in the American Revolution. He led by kind of four tenets. The first is he led by example. Second was he was relentless in his pursuit of worthy goals, kept his eye on the prize, if you will. His third was leverage the talents of the team and dig down into the team to figure out where those talents are. Because a lot of times, like Knox and Putnam, they come from unexpected places. And finally, his fourth was to be personally resilient when faced with setbacks, because there is no easy sailing when you've got a difficult job. There's always going to be setbacks. And how can you continue to be present, to be a positive force moving forward?
Thank you for having the conversation, Bill.
My book is about a staff ride. A staff ride is something that the American Army and the British Army, the Marine Corps use. You go to a historical site, you want to learn about contemporary leadership from it. You learn about the leaders that went there. There's a lot of study involved. It's not just a historical tour. And that's where my passion lies. And you've given me a wonderful opportunity to talk about some of those leadership lessons of these amazing folks that are part of this Boston campaign that began the American Revolution.
Well, my friends, I think we're all well prepared now for a staff ride to these historic Revolutionary War sites. But there's one other story I'd like to tell you of exemplary courage and leadership. It's the story of 30-year-old Captain Isaac Davis, the first colonial officer killed in the battle at Concord on April 19th, 1775. The story is narrated by me with full sound design and is available right now, along with many other bonus stories from past episodes as part of the HTDS membership program. You can start a 7-day trial today and access this content, plus ad-free episodes delivered to the most popular podcast apps like Spotify and Apple. Just go to htdspodcast.com/membership or click the link in the episode notes. History That Doesn't Suck is created and hosted by me, Greg Jackson. Episode produced by Dawson McCraw with research assistance by Ella Hendrickson. Production by Airship. Sound design by Molly Bach. Theme music composed by Greg Jackson. Arrangement and additional composition by Lindsey Graham of Airship. HTDS is supported by fans at htdspodcast.com/membership. My gratitude to you kind souls providing funding to help us keep going. Thank you. And a special thanks to our patrons whose monthly gift puts them at producer status. Ahmad Chapman, Andy Thompson, Art Lang, Bob Stinnett, Brad Davidson, Bronwyn Cohen, Bruce Hibbert, Carissa Sedlak, Charlie Mages, Chloe Tripp, Christopher Merchant, Christopher Pullman, Dan G., David Rifkin, Durante Spencer, Donald Moore, Ellen Stewart, Elizabeth Christiansen, El Chiviado, Bernie Lowmaster, G2303, George J. Sherwood, Henry Brunges, Holly Hamilton, Jake Gilbreth, James Bledsoe, Janie McCreary, Jeff Marks, Jessica Poppin, Joe Dobas, John Booby, John Frugal Dougal, John Oliveros, John Ridlevich, John Schaefer, Jonathan Turrell, Jordan Corbett, Joshua Steiner, Justin M. Spriggs, Justin May, K, Kim R., Tim Renninger, Kristen Pratt, Kyle Decker, L. Paul Goinger, Lawrence Neubauer, Linda Cunningham, Matt Siegel, Melanie Jan, Nate Seconder, Nick Caffero, Noah Hoff, Owen W. Sedlak, Reese Humphreys Wadsworth, Rick Brown, Robert Drazovich, Sarah Trewick, Sharon Thiessen, Sean Baines, Stacy Ritter, Stephen Williams, The Creepy Girl, Thomas Sabbath, Zach Green, and Zach Jackson. Join me in 2 weeks. I'd like to tell you a story. HTDS is supported by fans at htdspodcast.com/membership. My gratitude to you kind souls providing funding to help us keep going. Thank you. And special thanks to our patrons whose monthly gift puts them at producer status. Ahmad Chapman, Andy Thompson, Art Lang, Bob Stinnett, Brad Davidson, Bronwyn Cohen, Bruce Hibbert, Carissa Sedlak, Charlie Mages, Chloe Tripp, Christopher Merchant, Christopher Pullman, Dan G., David Rifkin, Durante Spencer, Donald Moore, Ellen Stewart, Elizabeth Christiansen, El Chiviado, Ernie Lowmaster, G2303, George J. Sherwood, Henry Brunges, Holly Hamilton, Jake Gilbreth, James Bledsoe, Janie McCreary, Jeff Marks, Jessica Poppin, Joe Dobas, John Booby, John Frugal Dougal, John Oliveros, John Ridlevich, John Schaefer, Jonathan Turrell, Jordan Corbett, Joshua Steiner, Justin M. Spriggs, Justin May, K, Kim R., Tim Reninger, Kristen Pratt, Kyle Decker, L. Paul Goinger, Lawrence Neubauer, Linda Cunningham, Matt Siegel, Melanie Jan, Nate Seconder, Nick Caffero, Noah Hoff, Owen W. Sedlak, Reese Humphreys Wadsworth, Rick Brown, Robert Drazovich, Sarah Trewick, Sharon Thiessen, Sean Baines, Stacy Ritter, Stephen Williams, The Creepy Girl, Thomas Sabbath, Zach Green, and Zach Jackson. Join me in 2 weeks. I'd like to tell you a story.
I've been counted out, dismissed, passed over, told I'd never be a golfer with just one arm. But the only thing that feels better than proving people wrong is outdriving them. I'm 14-year-old golfer Tommy Morsey, and I want to be remembered for my ability.
As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible in golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.